Imagine stepping into a frozen wilderness where the wind howls like a pack of wolves and the snow piles up so high it buries wagons overnight. And in the middle of all that brutal cold, there's this one guy, a Russian immigrant named Pyotr Volkov, who shows up in the Montana Territory back in 1879 with nothing but a few tools, some dreams of a better life, and this wild idea for a stove that everyone around him thinks is the dumbest thing they've ever seen. Because instead of building a simple caster and heater like all the other settlers, he starts digging into the earth right inside his tiny log cabin, mixing clay and stones into this massive, buried structure that looks more like a grave than a fireplace. And the neighbors, tough frontiersmen who've battled blizzards and built their homes with their bare hands, they gather around laughing, pointing fingers, calling him a fool who doesn't understand how things work in America, where progress means shiny metal stoves that burn hot and fast. Not some backward peasant contraption from the old world that seems like an LL collapse or smoke 'em all out, but Pyotr, with his thick accent and weathered face from years of Siberian winters, he just smiles quietly and keeps working, layering the clay-thick shaping channels for the smoke to snake through like hidden rivers under the ground. And as the days turn into weeks, the mockery grows louder, with folks betting he'd freeze solid come the first real snow, whispering that this buried fireplace of his was a sure ticket to an early grave. Yet deep down, Pyotr knew something they didn't. Something passed down from generations of Russians who survived harsher colds than Montana could ever throw at them. A secret in the way heat could be trapped and released slowly, like a bear storing fat for hibernation. And as autumn faded and the first flurries dusted the plains, the settlers stalked their woodpiles high, confident in their American ways, while Pyotr finished his earth stove, lit a small fire inside it for just 90 minutes, and watched as the massive structure absorbed the warmth like a sponge, radiating it out gently for hours on end. But no one believed him when he tried to explain, shaking their heads and walking away, leaving him isolated in his cabin as the temperatures began to plummet. And just when the community thought they'd seen the last of his crazy invention, a storm rolled in that would test everything they knew about survival, making them wonder if maybe, just maybe, they'd been wrong all along. You know, stories like this remind me of how often we dismiss what we don't understand. But stick around, because what happened next in that brutal winter changed everything for Pyotr and his skeptical neighbors. And it might just blow your mind how one man's buried fireplace turned mockery into awe. As the mercury dipped to 18 degrees below zero that January night in 1879, the Montana settlement hunkered down against a blizzard that screamed across the plains, burying doors in drifts of snow and turning simple tasks like fetching water into life-or-death struggles. And while the other cabins flickered with the constant glow of fires that needed feeding every hour or two, Pyotr Volkov's place stood quiet. No smoke billowing from the chimney after that initial 90-minute burn. Yet inside, the air hummed with a steady warmth that wrapped around you like a wool blanket. The massive clay stove he built, all 6 feet wide, and weighing as much as a horse holding onto the heat like it was treasure, slowly releasing it through the night without a single log added, and the neighbors shivering in their own homes despite burning through cords of wood that they'd chopped all summer. They couldn't wrap their heads around it when word got out that Pyotr's cabin stayed at a cozy 60 degrees while theirs hovered around freezing, with frost creeping up the walls and families huddling together under every quilt they owned. But it wasn't magic. No, it was smart design from the old Russian ways, where the stove, called a pek, was built with winding flues that captured the hot smoke, letting it heat the thick masonry before escaping, storing thermal energy in the clay and stone so efficiently that one firing could warm a home for 12 hours or more, using only a fifth of the fuel that those fancy cast iron stoves guzzled. And Pyotr, who'd learned this from his grandfather back in Siberia, where winters made Montanas look mild, he invited a few brave souls over during a lull in the storm, showing them how the buried channels under the floor circulated the warmth evenly. No hot spots or cold corners, just pure, radiant comfort that even heated his bed platform above the stove. And as they felt the difference, jaws dropping in the soft glow of the embers that had long since died down, the mockery turned to questions, then to admiration, with folks scratching their heads, wondering why they never thought of building something that worked with the earth instead of fighting against it. And Pyotr shared his knowledge freely, explaining how the buried aspect prevented heat loss and maximized efficiency, drawing from ancient Roman hypocaust systems but perfected in Russian villages over centuries. And by the time the storm cleared, a few settlers were already planning to tear out their old fireplaces. But not everyone was convinced yet, because another, even fiercer cold snap was brewing on the horizon. One that would push Pyotr's invention to its limits and reveal just how revolutionary it truly was. Hey, if you're hooked on these tales of ingenuity beating the odds, hit that like button and subscribe so you didn't miss out on more hidden history. Let this trust me. The best part is coming up. With the second blizzard hitting harder than the first, winds gusting up to 50 miles an hour, and snow so thick you could see your hand in front of your face. The Montana Territory, in 80 became a frozen hell where livestock perished in the fields and families rationed their wood like it was gold. But in Pyotr Volkov's cabin, that buried Fireplace now, the talk of the settlement proved its worth beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Maintaining a steady heat for over 12 hours straight, without a flicker of flame, the surface of the massive earth stove reaching a scorching 740 degrees Fahrenheit right after firing, then cooling slowly to distribute warmth like a living thing, keeping the interior at levels that allowed Pyotr to sleep soundly while others woke every hour to stoke their fires. And, as word spread through the drifts, more neighbors trudged over, bundled in layers, to witness this miracle firsthand, feeling the radiant heat seep into their bones and realizing how their own stoves, efficient as they seemed in milder weather, wasted energy by heating the air directly and letting it escape up the chimney, whereas Pyotr's design trapped it in the mass, releasing it gradually and evenly. A principle that not only saved wood but prevented the smoke-filled rooms and uneven temperatures that plagued frontier life. And soon enough, Pyotr found himself teaching workshops in the spring thaw, helping others build their own versions of the Russian peck, adapting it to local materials like river clay and fieldstones, turning what was once a source of ridicule into a community lifeline that helped more families survive the next winters with less toil and greater comfort. And this wasn't just a one-off tale, no, it echoed the broader story of Russian immigrants, many of them Mennonites, fleeing persecution, who brought such innovations to the American prairies in the late 19th century, influencing heating designs that eventually led to modern masonry heaters and even inspired elements in today's energy-efficient homes, proving that sometimes the old ways, dismissed as primitive, hold the keys to sustainability and resilience in ways shiny new inventions can't match. And Pyotr's legacy lived on, not just in the cabins that dotted Montana, but in the mindset shift among settlers who learned to respect knowledge from afar, blending it with their own to forge a stronger frontier. And as the years passed, stories of that buried fireplace spread like wildfire, reminding everyone that innovation often comes from the most unexpected places, wrapped in humility and persistence. If this story fired you up about forgotten history and clever survival hacks, make sure to smash that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment below, sharing your favorite part. Let's keep uncovering these gems together. And who knows, maybe it'll inspire you to think differently about the challenges in your own life.